Again, this I'm not going to step through every single point because we touched on many of them last time, but basically restricted forest only occurs on LUC 1 to 6 land. LUC 7 to 8 land is not restricted under this legislation. You can do whatever you were able to do prior to the introduction of this legislation. However, there are many areas of LUC 1 to 6 land which are not restricted forest. Key ones, which I will just repeat, are if you're wondering about the situation for the forest that you put in 2 months ago before you realized that this legislation was going to take effect and you're going to panic and you're in a panic, don't panic. Forest land that is forest land, which means established as forest prior to the 31st of October 2025 this year, is exempt. It's not, sorry, I shouldn't say exempt. I'm trying to make a distinction between exempt and restricted because they're different things. It's unrestricted. So the key thing is to make sure that you have evidence that it definitely was in forest as of the 31st of October, and then you should be able to register it with without having to go through the restricted approval pathway. Similar, forest species historically and into the future that are not predominantly exotic, so this essentially means indigenous forest, they are not restricted. There are a bunch of different classes of exempt Maori land. I won't enumerate those exhaustively, but view the Act. Erosion-prone land, which has a technical definition which we aren't entirely clear on what that actually is in a practical sense, region by region yet, but it is unrestricted. And I'll just briefly touch on that, though we will take a look later on. The wording in the legislation, I think, is any land that is mapped as having an erosion risk of high or severe in the regional or district level maps, it is unrestricted. What we're trying to find out is what those maps are, whether they're final, and basically make them available for planning purposes. Unmapped land, which is the majority of land is mapped, but unmapped land is basically land that doesn't have an LUC designation. Unfarmed land, which there is a specific definition of in the legislation. Don't just assume that because you think your land isn't farmed, then it qualifies for this criteria. The reason I've flagged it as pink is that the definition has changed slightly since the first draft of the legislation, but not in a material way from my perspective. Basically, unfarmed is land that has not been used for any farming purpose, including a laundry list of different things that qualify as farming, in the last 5 years, and has not had exotic forest established on it in the last 5 years prior to registration. So if you think you're going to use that pathway, you've got to make sure, be very sure that that applies to you. Also note that it applies at a title by title level. So there's actually a question about this that came in, which I'll get to later on, but this is unfarmed land is very much one where don't just assume that because you weren't farming that paddock, then it's got an exemption. Offsetting land has had a adjustment to basically avoid a loophole around P89 offsetting land. So offsetting land is exempt or is unrestricted, but only pre-1990 offsetting land. And then Crown afforestation land, which has a couple of definitions and exemptions, is also unrestricted. The remainder, which is probably most land actually in the LUC 1 to 6 category, will be restricted forest.